All right. Good morning, Dad.
Good morning.
So we're entering into day 12 of the Iran war, and word on the street is Trump is wanting to throw in the towel. Is that how you're reading it?
Yeah, I think that may be true. Again, with Trump, you can never know for sure. But I watched one of his recent press conferences, and I was struck, as were other analysts, by the fact that he was constantly talking about the tremendous success of this operation, so-called, this war that he's waging against Iran. And he on more than one occasion, he described it as complete or nearly complete. And that suggests to me that he's ready to declare victory and go home. I think he may have that thought. Uh, and that would be the best thing that could happen is, we've said that earlier. It's just that, okay, this is a total disaster, but we know Trump. Yeah, he has a way of just of declaring victory. Whatever he's done is the most amazing thing, and he'll just make up stuff about what he's done. He'll just say that his objectives were attained, and he'll pull two or three objectives out of the hat the hat that contains now probably 15 different objectives that he's stated over the last several days. And you'll say, that's really what we wanted to do. We did it. Everything's great. The most amazing operation in history. Yeah, we're out of here. Um, and the reasons are obvious. It's just that, first of all, he doesn't have the domestic support. As we said, he didn't go into this war to, laying the groundwork is normal, trying to convince the public, trying to convince Congress. He didn't do anything like that. So the polls show, yeah, that the people are not with him. There's been something of a bump in the approval, but it's still well below 50%. That's to be expected. That's what you always see. But it's really very, very low, especially for this stage in the war. And if it drags on, that'll just start to, wither away. And he'll lose the support that he's getting from Republicans, which is right now quite high. It's like 84, 85%. But that's, I think, based on their belief that he knows what he's doing and it's going to be quick and then he's going to get out of there. And so anyway, there's the domestic support, and then there's the economic pressure. There's the markets. And that's another thing is constantly, you see with his tweets, he's always trying to talk up, how, well, I guess to reassure investors and consumers, that he has the situation under control and that he's going to take out, the what remains of the Iranian Navy, and he's going to make sure that these ships go through. And if the Iranians tried to oppose it, he's going to, hit them 20 times harder than before. All of this. But all that betrays a certain nervousness. He's very nervous about what's happening in the markets. That's something he's sensitive to. So, yeah, he may really be looking for an off-ramp. And there are these rumors that at least I don't know, either of them are confirmed, but there are rumors that on at least two occasions he actually tried to reach out to the Iranians and negotiate a ceasefire. We don't know for sure if that's true. I find it believable. And according to these same reports, the Iranians said, "Hell no!" We've done that before. Um, and then there was this phone call that he had with Putin. I think just the other day, and it was a phone call initiated by Trump. And again, that suggests that he's maybe looking for a way out. Maybe old Vladimir can help him convince the Iranians, to agree to a ceasefire or something like that. We don't really know what they talked about because, the readout was very vague. It suggested that it wasn't a particularly friendly phone call, which is not surprising. But all of these are indications that Trump is getting nervous and may want to declare victory and go home. The problem, I think, really is the Israelis. Because again, they said they went into this war, and I think there's a great deal of truth to this. Again, according to the New York Times, and Marco Rubio is really, it was a combination of Israeli pressure and blackmail, if you like. It's just that they said, if you don't go in, we're going in, and that just, according to Marco Rubio and others, that convinced him, well, if we don't go in, then we're in trouble. Well, it doesn't make any sense. You wouldn't be in trouble if you didn't have all your assets there, but they put themselves in that position. So, this is the thing: is can they actually leave? Can Trump declare victory and go home while the Israelis are still there? The Israelis, Netanyahu may decide that, oh, we're not, we're going to keep on fighting, and he'll bet he'll be probably fairly confident that, or very confident that the Americans just won't be able to do it. If they attempt to, there will be such an outcry and so much pressure. If you see the Israelis on their own being battered, he'll go right back in. So I think that's what we're faced with, a desire to get out of there, but he's put himself in this trap, and the Israelis, at this point anyway, are not showing any willingness to pull out, Netanyahu. Now, there was a report, I believe it was in the Washington Post, that some Israeli officials were expressing their concern about this war, that it was not going well, and they didn't think that their, so-called objectives could be achieved. But there's no sign from Netanyahu that he's going to change. Again, Netanyahu, it's a matter of his vision. He wants to be kind of, one of the greatest heroes of Jewish history, a modern day King David or something. And then there's his personal political survival, and he, even his freedom, because there is a chance that he could actually be convicted and sent to prison.
Yeah, we've talked about if Trump can just pack up and leave. But even if the political pressure wasn't there and he was able to just declare victory and pack up, Iran will still just push all of us, destroy all of our bases if they're already destroyed, just kick us out of the region completely, right? I mean, I think this is the problem. I think the United States always thought that worst case scenario, we can just call time out and we can just, because I don't know why we thought that. I guess it's because in the past we just had the superiority and we just thought that, we can, if things don't go well, we can just pack up and leave. But we can't do that here, right? I mean, is that even an option, what you're saying? Would that Trump declares victory and go? I mean, the Iranians aren't going to, they're going to be kicking us out, right? That's not how it's going to be. It's that we are exiting out of this region, or this whole network that we built up in the Middle East will be gone. This is something that we built up for decades and decades and decades.
Yeah.
And then that means that Israel also will no longer have U.S. support in the region.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we could do it. We could leave. It just, and, again, the administration will work hard, and its many supporters will work hard to spin it in a certain way, as a great success. But there is the fact of the smoking ruins of all these different military bases. I mean, they really have been hit hard, and they continue to be hit. These are, I don't know how much damage has been done, but just looking at the radars, we talked about some of those radars are worth more than $1 billion, and they've been destroyed. And I guess one of them in particular would take 5 to 8 years to replace, and it would be over $1 billion. It's probably in today's dollars and with today's economic and regulatory environment, it'll probably be $2 billion. Just, we're talking about one radar here, so we're talking about many billions of dollars, and it just may not even be feasible to rebuild some of these bases. So, if nothing else, it's going to look bad. And we're going to have to deal with the fallout, among the Gulf states. And they're kind of careful what they're saying, at least in public, and expressing their support for the U.S. But that they have to be just furious, and they're cursing, I'm sure in private and in phone calls to U.S. officials. They say, because look, this was the whole idea is, okay, we let you in, we give up some of our sovereignty, we said, that provides us with protection. And we're not getting any protection. In fact, it's just the opposite. There's a big fat target on each one of us, and we are getting hit hard. We're suffering this economic damage. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of fallout, and there will be an awareness. Maybe the moment he leaves, there'll be all this spin operation that has everybody's head spinning. But then people are going to start looking at the ruins and say, "What was that all about?" and 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 then within Iran, I think there's a real chance. It's not certain, but then they may just decide, forget this. We're going for the bomb. We've had enough of this. They look at North Korea and they say, they made the right decision. We're a fool not to go for the bomb a long time ago. Or they won't say that because, they respect Ali Khamenei. And, I think he was very much an idealist, Khamenei, when it came to these matters. But his son may say, no, we got to get the bomb. And they have the wherewithal to do it. There is something like 1,000 pounds of highly enriched uranium. That's 60%. And that's even closer to weapons grade. Weapons grade is approximately 90%. But to get from 60 to 90, it doesn't take very much. It's kind of exponential. To go from 1 to 2% actually actually takes more effort. So, we don't know. I think I've read reports that all that highly enriched uranium is down in like underground in Isfahan, inaccessible right now, or largely inaccessible. And I think also in Fordo, and they can't get it out without seeing it. But that's assuming a lot. I think that there's a very good chance that they have a good portion. They don't need all of that, by the way. And they do have their other uranium that's, for anywhere from 3 to 20%. And they can have, it's a big country, they can do it, and they have the scientists. So this is the thing. It's like and who can blame them for going for a bomb in this case? And it was completely unnecessary. They were willing to make a deal. They had a deal earlier, the JCPOA. You killed the one man who was standing between you and a race for the bomb, and then you gave him every incentive to go for a bomb. So that may happen. And then, are they going to stand idly by if you pull out? They're going to keep on building up their missile systems. They're going to strengthen their military relations with both Russia and China. They're going to improve their missiles. We've already seen an improvement in the accuracy, but that will go further. And then, hopefully, I guess that's the best case scenario. Is just that it would be a disaster for us, but okay, essentially Iran wins. Trump declares victory, leaves. Maybe Israel. Maybe if Trump actually has the sense or the fortitude, the courage to stand up to Netanyahu and tell, hey, you're not going to do it, and no matter what, I'm not going with you. And the Israelis stand out because they've suffered. They they see that they can't continue the fight, definitely not on their own. And Iran stands and Iran becomes stronger. Maybe that could happen. Let's hope so.
Yeah, well, do you think this war, it will end on Iran's terms, right? I mean, when we're talking about the U.S. wanting to pull out, it's whether or not will Iran let the U.S. pull out.
Yeah, I don't know that they can stop us from pulling out.
Well, okay, if we really actually pull out, but I mean...
Yeah, but the thing is, they may just say declare, I can imagine, it's like, okay, you're pulling out. We have now declared that these bases are from here on out, they're off limits to you. If you try to move back into them, we're going to hit them again. This is something like that. And maybe, as the U.S. pulls out, they'll just continue to hit the bases and hit them, so, those are all possibilities. Yeah.
But Israel can't pull out, right? So what happens? Will Iran say, okay, all right, bye-bye, America, get out of here. Now we can just deal with Israel one-on-one. And they're in big trouble. Israel's in huge trouble then, right?
Yeah.
So what does this mean going forward with Israel? Is this an existential battle that will lead to either, Israel no longer being a state when this is all said and done? Is this the end of Israel?
Well, yeah, unfortunately, like if it looks like it's really getting there, we have the Samson option, as we discussed earlier. That's the thing, is that I'm sure Israel is looking at this, and I imagine Netanyahu is thinking, but Trump wants to get out of here. We damaged Iran, but they're still standing. They really, hit these bases hard. They, there's a lot of anger in the U.S. about our involvement. This is looking really bad. So for him, he and for the Israeli state, they may view this as existential, and so they're going to pull out all the stops to keep Trump in there. But and just hope that through continual escalation, they'll eventually be able to beat down Iran and balkanize Iran, attain their real objectives.
Okay, well, I'll just ask you, do you think that we will find a way to extricate ourselves, that Trump can do this pullout somehow? He seems like he wants an off-ramp. He's called Putin for help. Do you think he can pull that off? That's a possibility, or are we just stuck because it doesn't matter because it's Israel's in charge, and if Israel's just going to take us down with us,
and
take us down with them.
You have to say it's possible. He could just pull out, and he has shown, let's say, moments of independence, but it's just with the ceasefire agreements, and so those were things that the Israeli government did not want. But they eventually, in both cases, though, it must be pointed out, they got their way. It's just like I'd have to say both ceasefires have been sabotaged. The second one is in the process of being sabotaged right now. The Israelis never kept up their part of the bargain. And Trump failed to hold the Israelis' feet to the fire. So that just shows that, okay, yeah, he can maybe occasionally, especially when he has a certain amount of the Israeli public on his side, like he did in the case of these ceasefires because of the hostage issue, he can stand up to Netanyahu. He doesn't show the strength of character to actually, stand behind the agreements that, the ceasefire agreements that he's reached with them. But he has shown, at least in the short term, he's able to stand up to him. Now, the thing with this is, I think, truly existential for Netanyahu and the Israeli state. And I don't think there really isn't a significant part of Israeli society that would support Trump on this. So, in other words, there was a split. When it came to these ceasefires and the hostage issues, in fact, a majority of Israelis wanted those ceasefires. Netanyahu didn't. But that split was, reflected, in a split within the Jewish American donors and, within this country. So that, again, Trump had some room to maneuver, but right now I don't see any sign of a split. It's just all of Israel is behind this war. And if Trump tries to walk away from it, I don't think he'll find the same room to maneuver. So I think he'll, again, it's not impossible. He might surprise us, but I don't think he'll be able to do it.
The thing is with Israel is their objective, we talked about, was really just to leave Iran in a state of chaos, give it the Libya-Syria solution, balkanize it, but that didn't happen. And everything that we see what the U.S. and Israel is doing is strengthening and unifying the Iranian people. So they don't have what is the plan for them? Is it still to try to balkanize it? It's just to have the U.S. go scorched earth and do some massive ground invasion? Like what do they even want us to do?
Yeah,
because that isn't possible.
It's still the plan. Again, we're just in the early days of the war. So they're probably thinking, well, we just got to keep on going. Now, unfortunately, I think they're foolish to think they could do this. It's just that you really can't find any instance in the history, where you achieved regime change through, or let's say balkanization of the sort that we're talking about, just purely through air power. It just does not happen. I mean, this is something that has been studied by political scientists again and again. There's a lot of literature on it. It doesn't happen, but they convinced themselves that they could do it. It's hubris. Now, again, I think their only chance is, you have to have people on the ground. So there are two ways to mount a ground invasion: through proxies, and we've talked about the Kurds and and Azerbaijan. There's also the Baluchis, but right now there's just no sign that there are some signs that maybe Aliyev in Azerbaijan was getting ready to do something. He was moving his assets up to the border. He was claiming that this drone that flew into his territory was an attack by Iran. I don't think it was. I think he knows it wasn't, but he was seizing on it as a pretext to look for a war. But he's since stopped the reports we're getting from the Kurds is like, no, we're not, we've been, fooled several times before. We're not doing this. And I think the Baluchis apparently are rock solid. At least, this is what I heard, that they're not interested at all. They're just not. Iran is holding together. Now, possibly over time, it's not impossible. You can't say that it's impossible. Eventually you could weaken the Iranian state to the point where maybe you could convince these groups to go in on the ground. I don't know even then if they can really do very much. In the case of Azerbaijan, again, Iran has some. Azerbaijan is very vulnerable to retaliation by Iran. They have something like most of government revenue comes from from basically their oil industry, and their oil industry is concentrated in a certain part of the country, and the Iranians could take it out. I'm sure Aliyev is looking at that and said, do I really want to do this? And that in turn would hurt Israel too, because that's a source of much of Israel's oil. So, that's not impossible. That could happen, and that could be a real threat to Iran. Then the other possibility is American troops. Now, it seems so crazy that the Americans would even consider that I'm tempted to just kind of dismiss that out of hand. But the other day there was some kind of briefing, and there was this Senator Blumenthal, who's completely crazy on all kinds of foreign policy issues, a friend of Lindsey Graham's. But he said that he went into this meeting and they were talking about putting troops on the ground. It was just a briefing by the Pentagon officials. And he said, I can't get into the details, but this is madness. So it's something that they're really considering.
How would you even do that? You can't do an amphibious landing, right? They'll blow up our
it would
boats.
Be very hard. It was. And then the thing is that once you do it, then you have the problem of logistics, and you have to support it. It would be very, very challenging. And then, it's just like, again, so far as we know, I think only 8 American soldiers have been killed. Now, there are rumors that there are more or whatever, but, 8 confirmed deaths. That's because most of them have been taken out of harm's way. A lot of these bases were, not entirely evacuated, but in good part evacuated. And, the soldiers are spending a lot of time down in bunkers and whatever. And so that's why they're safe. And then you have the sailors, but they're well out at sea. They're a few hundred kilometers. They're well over their horizon, and they're probably safe from Iranian missiles. But if you put them on Iranian soil, that all changes. That's just like you have put them in harm's way. And then we were starting to get, we'll start seeing the body bags. I mean, that's just, I don't know what they would try to achieve. I've heard these things about some kind of special operation, like they would try to go down and seize the nuclear material. They would have to fly into the interior of Iran, and seize a certain amount of territory, and then begin this operation that would have to last days, if not weeks. And I don't even know what, it just seems so fantastical. There's just no way the Iranians are going to just watch them do this. Of course they're not. And you can see, again, the accuracy of their missiles and their drones, going across the Persian Gulf, taking out, one facility after another, and just with pinpoint accuracy. And do you think that, like, if you seize a piece of territory within Iran, that's not going to happen to those soldiers? They're not going to be, hit just constantly, bombarded by Iranian munitions.
Yeah, maybe Trump had a Mission Impossible movie marathon, and he's got all kinds of crazy ideas. Because I just don't understand. I don't even know if we can. I mean, because how can you sustain a ground force? I just don't understand.
Yeah,
there's no
right.
logistics.
Again, the logistics is a big problem, right? It doesn't work.
And I think we're just the fact that they're talking about this just shows you how desperate the Trump administration is. Yeah, and I think they realize is that they don't have all the time in the world. They'll say it as long as it takes, or Trump says it's over, and then Pete Hegseth said it might take months. Who knows? But the problem is we just don't have months because they are closed the Strait of Hormuz. The downstream effects from this are going to start hitting us soon. They've already hit us.
They already hit us, but it's going to get a lot worse, right?
Right, and Trump was able to allay it a little bit by saying, like, I guess this is we're wrapping it up. Don't worry. But we know that that's not going to hold. It's not going to happen. So At what point, if you're choking off the world with this energy, and it's because you attacked Iran, the rest of the world, at what point do they get so upset and they get involved? Like, hey, look, you can't do this anymore. We're going, this America, you got to go. Israel, you got to stop. When does China get involved? When does these other countries? Because what you're doing is you're rapidly turning the whole world against the United States and Israel. I mean, they're already, most of the world's against us already. But at this stage, I just can't believe how rapidly our reputation has dropped through this. I mean, it was already in the dumps. Israel's was in the dumps, but it's just destroyed. Especially think about how we just started this war with a double tap on a girls' school and this failure to acknowledge it, even though we have video evidence of a Tomahawk missile. And Trump goes up and says some crazy thing like, "Oh, well, there's, it was a Tomahawk, but there's lots of Tomahawks. Maybe Iran got one of our Tomahawks and shot their own Tomahawk during our." It's insane. Just like we have no honor left as a country. It's just destroyed. Like, even if we just stop where we are now, it's over. The amount of damage that has been done has been catastrophic. The U.S. empire is done. It's over. Israel is over. There's nothing putting that. You can't put that Humpty Dumpty back together again. It's cracked.
Yeah. Oh, it clearly has done severe damage to an already damaged U.S. and Israeli reputation. And it's damaging our alliances. We've talked about the Gulf states, right? But then they're the oil producers, but then the main consumers of that oil are our allies in the Far East. So we have South Korea and Japan, and they're expressing support for the U.S., but they have to be really upset about this. And South Korea in particular, because it's not just the oil, but it just very recently the Pentagon stated that, okay, we're going to have to take a THAAD unit from South Korea and redeploy it to the Middle East, because there's an admission that what we've seen and heard is true, that their THAADs have been destroyed in the Middle East, and that has really angered the not the Ukrainians, but rather the Koreans, the South Koreans, because this was something that the U.S. had insisted on years ago. We're going to install a THAAD there, and China was very much against it. I think the main reason is that it included a radar system that extends deep into Chinese territory, and they did not want that. And so they expressed extreme displeasure, and then they imposed economic sanctions on South Korea, and let's say they stopped tourism, something similar to what they did to Japan over the recent dispute. They caused billions of dollars worth of economic damage to South Korea. And South Korea just had to eat it for the sake of the U.S., its relationship with the U.S. Now the U.S., after all this, say, "Oh, I'm sorry, we need that, and we're taking it." So they're obviously really upset about this. Now, it doesn't mean that that alliance is going to end, tomorrow. Obviously it won't. But it's part of this process where, these things move slowly. Institutions take a while to change. But I think people in these countries are starting to think something that they never thought before. And it's like, maybe it really doesn't make sense to be part of this alliance. Maybe we're not really getting any security from this. So it's, again, I think that's especially true of the Gulf states, but also, again, of South Korea and Japan.
Yeah, no, I saw this story trending on the Chinese internet. They're calling it Seoul's Kabul moment, that you can't trust that the U.S. will just leave you. They don't care. And I think that's what all these, the Gulf states are realizing as well. It's like, hey, they don't actually care about us. This isn't for our protection. We're just being used. It's all used for just U.S. hegemony. We're just pawns. We're expendable. Basically, in the U.S. mind, these countries like South Korea, Japan, these are just cannon fodder for when we want to go to war with China. That's the idea, so we don't have to die. We can just... And so I think that's breaking through. And then, like I said, you don't want to be associated with the United States. You don't want to be associated with people like Pete Hegseth and Trump, the way that they talk and where they're so wanton and just about, the civilian deaths, they kill the girls' school. I mean, and Hegseth has said some crazy things, just like, he's like, the only people that need to be afraid are the Iranians that are still alive. Something like that. Like, what kind of just crazy genocidal talk is this? This is not you don't want to be associated with that. I don't want to be
Right.
associated with that. I'm ashamed as
Yeah.
a country. And just people around the world see that. And Iran is more popular today than ever because it's standing up to Israel and the United States, who are clearly the bad guys. They're the
Yeah.
bullies in this situation. And the way that we did it as well, we really woke up the people of Iran into something that I think is unstoppable. They didn't want this war. They tried to negotiate again and again, and we attacked them twice during negotiations. We started off by assassinating the Ayatollah, a religious leader of 300 million people. You assassinate like the Pope of 300 million people, the equivalent, and then you double tap a girls' school. You kill this religious leader along with his granddaughter and his daughter-in-law. I mean, and now the
His
new
wife,
leader,
right.
his wife.
Yeah. His
It's,
son,
it's just
there's a daughter, I think.
so
Yeah.
shameful, so disgraceful, everything that we've done, and there's no apology or recognition about it.
Right.
You just think about how how much you've woken up the people of Iran. That these are people that won't be cowed, that you woke up a beast of this. And not just in Iran. We talked about, the Ayatollah, that's 300 million Shias right there. And then just the rest of the world. The rest of the world is furious too. So it's so catastrophic. I can't believe because this war was just so unnecessary. It was just so,
Right.
and it's been carried out in such a barbaric manner. And we
And
escalate.
reckless and incompetent too. Yeah.
Yeah. And just like, okay, we did some, now let's hit desalination plants. Let's cause this massive environmental disaster by hitting this huge oil refiner where people now are suffering from this toxic smoke, and that this huge oil cloud is just moving over Central Asia now. It's just I can't think of a more just sort of black and white. It's almost cartoonish how villainous we are, how clearly bad we are in this.
Yeah.
And then as it starts to just as this continues, you either, even if we pull out or as it continues this disastrous trajectory, more people are wanting to lay blame for the war, and they'll lay blame at Trump, but more and more people will just lay blame at Israel because they understand that the only reason this war happened is because Israel wanted this war. This was not something that Americans wanted. We specifically voted for somebody to not do this. This was a big thing for a lot of Americans, was like, no more endless wars. No more. We are America first. Stop putting the interest of Israel or Ukraine or whatever ahead of what's going on here. People are struggling to pay rent and buy food in this country. And look where we are. It's just, I don't know where I'm going with this, but
Yeah, well,
I'll
no,
just
good
take it.
rant. Right. Yeah, I guess I wanted to comment on that, the girls' school attack. Again, I don't think it was intentional, but I can't be completely sure about that.
I can't be sure either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I wish I could say I could be sure about that. But there we have some interesting information has come out. It's not confirmed, but first of all, is that maybe it was selected by AI, the building. And then second, there should have been some sort of check in place to make sure that, okay, this is not a civilian building, a girls' school or something like that. And there had been a review process in place. It was called civilian harm mitigation. And its very purpose was to make say, oh, yeah, wait a second, that's not a warehouse storing missiles. That's a girls' school. Take that off the list. You just have this team go over and double check everything. And you can't say, well, sometimes in war, you don't have time, the mistakes are made. But they obviously had time. They were preparing for this. They were drawing up their target lists, weeks, if not months in advance. They didn't do it. And why? Okay, apparently this was put in place under Biden, this review process. And that's to his, maybe not so much Biden, because Biden didn't know what was going on, but whoever in the State Department or in the Pentagon did it. And that's to their credit. But then Hegseth took it off. He described it as woke. So again, his idea is woke is that you actually are concerned about blowing up little girls or something. That's where we are. Yeah. This is, I was reminded of an incident that occurred in 1988 when the U.S. Shot down an Iranian airliner with 290 people aboard. All 290 were killed. It was shot down by a U.S. warship. I think it was the USS Vincennes. And clearly, it's not we resisted having a proper investigation, but I think it's generally suspected that this captain was just a little bit too trigger happy. He wasn't. He fired these missiles before knowing what really he was shooting at, and he killed all these people. So again, this is something, we say we're talking about Iran has been at war with us for 47 years, which is utter nonsense. We have been at war with them, and there have been these horrible incidents all over through this time. But at least then there was maybe we'll see something this time, but I doubt it. There was a semi-decent, let's say, handling of the event. That was under Ronald Reagan, and he did send a diplomatic note to the Iranians expressing his condolences. He didn't make a public apology, but he did do that at least, and then they provided compensation for the victims. So, I think there should have been a fuller investigation and a public apology. Again, Iran was not at war with the U.S. or anything, and we shot down the civilian airliner. Anyway, I just was reminded of that. I was thinking, yeah, that was a big deal back then. But this is happening every day in Iran now, right? I mean, it's just schools. I heard we can't even keep track of all the damage and the massacres that have occurred. We know about the girls' school. Apparently, the same morning there was a gym where a girls' volleyball team was practicing, and that was hit, and they were. Most of those team members were killed. This is the stuff that's happening every day.
Yeah, it's sad. It's terrifying. How long do you think this can last, though? Because there are a couple things. We've talked about the Strait of Hormuz being choked off, but also just the amount of, the munitions. It seems like we're basically completely out of air defense. It looks like Israel's getting hit hard, and I'm not seeing much going up, if anything at all, in terms of interceptors.
Right.
And just the cost. I heard Colonel Douglas McGregor saying, with the Kosovo air campaign, it was 78 days, and it cost $4 billion in munitions. He said that we spent $5 billion in the first 24 hours on this one, just to show you how much we're blowing through, and at what point Yeah, so I don't know how long can it even go on before the Strait of Hormuz pressure just builds to a boiling point and other countries get involved, or the world economy just collapses and everything goes on fire, or we run out of munitions, or Israel gets hit too hard. I don't feel like this won't go on for months, will it?
Right. Well, it just might. I don't know. I wish I could say that it won't, but there are several clocks that are ticking. Okay, there are the munitions. By the way, there were some reports that came out that the U.S. was spending $1 billion a day. I don't believe that. That's something that would be sustainable for the U.S. I think actually it was Patricia Merens, a defense analyst, said, I think I gave that figure. She said she still stands by it, that it would be the U.S. and Israel combined. Basically, there was later very careful analysis of what happened in Israel. And Israel by itself was spending $2 billion a day. During the 12-day war. So you have Israel, but plus the U.S., it ends up being more like 6 or 7, maybe even $8 billion, at least in the first part. They start to run down the munitions, and then it starts to tail off. But we're looking, and over the course of 3 months, she predicted $360 billion. This is just for munitions. But, it's like, you can talk about the cost, but in the end, it doesn't even matter if you don't have the munitions. And we know the very limited production rates for the air defense missiles. It's just like one a month for the SM-3. Those are the ones that are fired from the ships. It's maybe 600. Perhaps they got it up to 700 a year for the Patriots. But then Ukraine has some claim on those, and that's still very slow. We probably burned through more than 700 already, so that they just can't be replaced. Now, some of these other bombs, maybe we have larger. The Tomahawk inventory was reduced, and for this we can thank the Houthis, because of that 7-week war last year. We expended a lot of Tomahawks. We partially depleted that stockpile, and so we're going in with a less than a full stockpile, even of Tomahawks. Yeah, so all of these things that imposes these real constraints on our ability. Now, we've got all this brave talk about how they've taken out all the air defense in Israel, but there's still no evidence that our planes are actually flying, or
You
not
mean
Israel, but
Iran?
in Iran. There's no any evidence that we are actually flying. Maybe occasionally they go briefly into Iranian airspace. But they're in general, they're firing these air to ground missiles from Iraqi airspace or from the Arabian Sea, and I don't know if that's going to change. Maybe eventually they'll grind down Iranian airspace, but just don't forget, Iran is a very large country. And if you actually look at the map where the hits have been, again, these standoff strikes, they're all in the very westernmost part of the country and the very southern part of the country. And there's a huge part of the country that hasn't even been affected. And don't tell me they don't have anything stored back there, air defense and launchers and whatever. They have a very, very deep rear, that tells you, oh yeah, they're in it for the long haul. And we don't, again, we have these very expensive weapons that are graded, crushing weak opponents, but we found an opponent that's not so weak, that one that can actually fight back. Maybe it can't hit our ships if we keep them well offshore. But it can shoot down our planes if they go in. That's really where air defense, I think, counts more than the missiles. It's actually, everybody says, oh, we got to have the Patriots. We got to have the Patriots. I'm not even sure why, or even the THAADs, Ted Postal, he says, they're almost worthless even when they're functioning properly, and they're not functioning properly because now the radars have been destroyed. But when they're everything's set up and they're working like the way they're supposed to, it's maybe 5% or something for ballistic missiles. But the one thing they can hit well are aircraft. Now, the Iranians are not going to fly, their aircraft to Israel, so that's not really much of an issue. But I think also maybe slower moving missiles and drones. And that's the thing, is like when that's worn down, then they eventually at some point the Iranians can just start sending drones into Israel. And, we're very cheap, and they just have, I think they make 100 of them a day anyway. They can just keep on sending them and sending them and sending them.
More than that, I think I saw somewhere like 10,000 drones a month or something like this.
Okay, maybe, yeah.
And I heard in terms of ballistic missiles, I was seeing this at least from Chinese publication. I don't remember if it was 100 or 300 a day, but basically the Chinese were saying that it's a lot of times people look at the stockpiles when they're looking before a war, like, whoa, look at the X amount of tanks and X amount of vessels you have. That really doesn't matter. It's your ability to produce. And that essentially Iran can keep this rate up forever. They have these massive underground missile silos. They have, they have all the components and supply chains from it, largely thanks to China as well. Iran will not run out of ballistic missiles. And the fact that Israel and the U.S. are already out of air defense, and also looking at they will be out of offensive weapons the longer this continues. Iran can outproduce them. The one thing that I think the U.S. has been using to some effect is the Lucas drone. Have you heard of that one?
Yes, I have.
Right.
That's actually a copy of the Shahhead.
Exactly. This is, and the U.S. military has been bragging about this. I've been seeing news clips about it, like, oh, look how intelligent we are. We captured this Iranian drone and reverse engineered it. So you're saying you admit that your best weapon that you're using in this conflict right now is something that you copied from the Iranians, supposedly this backwards third world country that you've been telling us that will be a pushover. No, we're now trying to adapt their weapon systems. This is the problem. We just have all the equipment for the wrong war, and we just can't accept that. And we saw what happened with the Ukraine war. That this is largely a drone war. So we should have been preparing, just from the Ukraine war itself. But the Ukrainians themselves have said, like our Switchblade drones, whatever. They said our drones are crap, are worthless. They just don't even want them. They don't even use them. So it's just like
right.
And
except for the Lucas.
right, which is the Shahhead, which is a copy of that. I'm sure it's not nearly as advanced as the Russians' Garan 2, which was also originally from the Shahhead.
Right.
And from what I've heard,
and larger, warhead and everything. Right.
Right. And from what I've heard is now that the Russians are starting to give some of like, hey, we've made a lot of improvements on what you gave us.
Yes. Thank you for helping this out. These are good.
Right.
And we kept on working on them. Right.
Right, and now
Yeah.
we have the Lucas drone. We're finally built their old Shawhead, which doesn't have the range. It's more expensive than theirs. It's still not as good, because we just started cranking these out, and that's something that we're bragging as a military tactical win. And it's just
Right.
an admission of our weakness and the fact that our military is not equipped for the modern war, and we just can't wrap our heads around that. It's just like, but look how big these aircraft carriers are. Did you look at those Abrams tanks? They're so cool, but they're just worthless. That's the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of wonder about the Lucas. I heard they only cost 30,000, which is really great for, an American weapons. So but how many can we make? That's the big question. I don't know what the productive capacity is, but I'm sure it's not nearly as much as what the Iranians can make. The Iranians, it's probably one company in the U.S. I don't know, but the Iranians have just a network of companies all around the country that are just churning these out. Different models of drones, not just one kind.
Right. I mean, and this is their region. I mean, just the audacity, the hubris of the United States, for us to come over and just to think that we can wipe out a civilization, Persia, something that's been around for thousands of years. I mean, it's such an evil thing to do to begin with. We're talking about a civilizational state. We're not just talking about just some, some Somaliland or whatever. This
Which
is
would be
Persia.
evil too. Right?
Yeah, it's all evil, but I mean, but it just makes it that much more evil. It's like you want to wipe out. Why would you want to do that to the world? Like this is Persia. They have a right to have their civilization.
They're terrible people. They're evil people. They act in a menacing way. They cut women in half and they kill little babies. These are all things that Trump has said over the last few days. It's really
so
crazy
cartoonish
stuff. But again, I think all that hyperbolic language is again a sign that he's a little bit nervous about what's going on. It's just like we got ourselves into a fix. Well, how do you justify it? Well, we're going against the most evil people in the world. We just had to do it. That's excuse number 22 right there. They're just so evil. We had to attack them. Cut women in half. What is?
So that's why we that justifies even
Right.
if that was true. We of course we know it isn't. Is that
Yeah.
So that's why we can double tap a little girls' school, kill 168 little girls. I mean, it's just such a stain on this country. It really is. It just and it's just so crazy that it's just not in our interest at all. We can't even make the argument of why this is in our interest, and that's why I just know that the further this goes on and once the economic downstream effects are going to hit us, which they're already beginning to a bit, but once they really hit us in the whole world, man, everybody's going to start playing the blame game. And where do you put the blame? Well, you put it obviously a lot on Trump, but it's going to be Israel. It's like Israel made Trump do this. Trump still, I'm not giving Trump a pass. He's still the president.
Right, absolutely.
It's his, this is what he's supposed to do. But I mean, obviously, who was pressuring him to do this? If Israel wasn't around, this wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, again, according to the New York Times, it's not, just conspiracy theorists on the internet. It's the establishment. That's part of the problem. It's just that he didn't even win over. In the case of the Iraq War under George W. Bush, they worked and they won over the establishment and mainstream media. They were all on the side of the U.S. attack on Iraq. He didn't do it, so it's like they're all coming out of the woodwork now and saying this, starting increasingly to say, "Hey, this is crazy." I mean, you had I mentioned Blumenthal, but Chris Murphy also attended. He's a senator, a Democratic, senator, and he attended one of these briefings, and he said that it was just totally incoherent, that they couldn't really even state none of the objectives that they said were achievable. And he said, this is just a disaster of epic proportions. I mean, this is what he said. And again, this is very much a mainstream kind of, so I think Trump's in real trouble. This is something,
predictable, but they just worked
that's right.
on
The thing is, like you say, how could we? We're just a couple of guys on the internet, and we knew that, and a lot of other people knew it. It just look at it. It's if you're paying attention, you could see this happening. I don't think I've been surprised by things. I'm only surprised by how fast the Iranians have moved, but I expected all these things to happen at some point.
Yeah. The Iranians, they're confident. You can see it now. They're chipper bees. They know they can see the pressure that the situation that Trump's in, and when somebody's wanting a ceasefire, it means they're losing. They understand, and you can see it on Arachi's face. That little smirk when they say, "Are you worried about a U.S. ground invasion?" He's like, "No, we're waiting for them. Bring them on." And you can just see it on their social media game as well. They know they're in the driver's seat. So this means that it will, and they're, from my understanding, they are starting to set some type of demands. I think they're saying guarantees that the U.S. will never attack again, somehow, ironclad, sanctions relief, but also they want compensation for the damage that's been dealt to their country. Like
Yeah.
this is I mean, how can Trump do that? He's all about, oh, look, I went over there and now they're giving me $1 trillion in investments. And now you start this whole war, blow through tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars, probably with total the damage of the bases and everything else, lots of lives lost. And then Iran kicks your ass, tells you got to get out of here, and then you have to pay us now for all the damage you did.
Yeah.
We want compensation for those families, all those the parents or the children that you murdered, their families. They need compensation. And okay, there's no way that Trump can spin this as a victory. I know he just likes to say it.
That's the problem, which means that I don't think that that the U.S. and Israel are capable of actually admitting they lost. And another thing that the Iranians may very well demand is that, which is very, very reasonable, of course, is, okay, we can talk about our nuclear program, and we're also going to talk about the Israeli nuclear program.
Oh, please. Yes.
Right.
That's what the world needs. I think the whole world is just a little bit is on edge because of how unhinged Israel is and the fact that they do have this illegal weapon stockpile. I mean, if I don't want to even rehash the whole thing, but we just want to just take a step back and just look at the whole situation of Israel. It's just so crazy that they are doing this to Iran with a civilian nuclear program. They have these illegal weapons, and I can't. I just can't get my head around it sometimes. I'm just like, what kind of crazy timeline are we living in?
Right. Yeah. I think thinking about Israel, I think we haven't mentioned actually what's going on in Lebanon. At least there's actually a lot going on in Gaza. We brought that up, but it's just a reminder that it continues. They're still killing people. I think just the other day they killed 6 Gazans, or just in one day. A family, a father and a daughter, and others, and it's just the same thing is happening. And they're still restricting. Are actually, is my understanding, maybe this has changed, but the last I checked is that they imposed a starvation blockade on them again, and nobody's talking about it. And again, there are those patients that are in desperate need of treatment outside of Gaza. They're only letting out a few at a time, a trickle through the Rafah crossing. That all is, it's just, again, the misery of Gaza continues, and it's completely, and it's a misery that is willed by Israel. It's imposed on them by Israel. It's a sadistic treatment that continues. But then in Lebanon, okay, the Israelis launched an attack. They say that somehow Hezbollah violated ceasefire. It was just a joke. I mean, the ceasefire that was in place was, I've heard it described as the most violated ceasefire in the history of the world. And it was violated by Israel every day. They were killing people. I think they killed a total of 400 people during the course of the so-called ceasefire. And they demolished tens of thousands of homes. They took territory. They never stopped. They just slowed down. That's all they did. And now Hezbollah is fighting back, and Israel has intensified its airstrikes on Israel. They've just wiped out, entire apartment blocks the way they do in southern Beirut. They have displaced at least 500,000. 500,000 have been displaced, to escape these air raids. And they've killed something like 600. So, in per capita terms, Lebanon is suffering even more than Iran is. Iran is, the casualties are up around 1,300, 1,400 last I checked. Iran is a much bigger country. So they have killed a lot of people there, and they're fighting on the ground too. They restarted the ground invasion, and like last time, it's not going well. It's like when they actually try to fight Hezbollah on the ground, they have a real fight on their hands. And so there's at least been one soldier killed, many severely injured, one IDF soldier killed. and number of tanks destroyed. They're in a tough fight on the ground, and this is what always happens. So this is all going on, and not to mention the West Bank. It's just that Israel's involved in so many wars that we forget about some of them.
Yeah, well, it's starting to come back to bite them now. I mean, Israel's all about doing regime changes around the world, decapitation strikes, assassinations. We've seen that. Well, it sounds like Iran is actually can retaliate and play eye for an eye type of game here. I don't know if this is true, but there's a rumor that Ben-Gvir's house was hit by a missile and that he's dead or severely injured. There's also saying that Smotrich's son was very, very severely injured. I don't know if he's alive from a Hezbollah artillery attack. And there's rumors as well of Netanyahu's brother being killed, that Netanyahu's house was hit. So this is hitting home. We're talking about, these are the top people of the cabinet, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, Netanyahu. These three guys, they've been the most fanatical, genocidal spokespeople for Israel, and Iran is saying, okay, we're going after you. You kill our leadership, or you kill Ali Khamenei, then all right, you set the precedent. And this is the other thing that I think we'll look back in history and just say, it's like, this is a war that Israel and the United started, and they set the precedent for civilian infrastructure attacks, decapitation, assassinating civilian targets. They started this. They started it, and it's like, okay, you set these rules. This is the war that you ordered Israel, and it's not going very well for you now. And just the attempts for them to get any sympathy is just laughable. And when Mark Levin or other people talk about these cluster ballistic munitions coming in, like war crime. Look, why is the world not talking about all these war crimes? And people just send a picture of Gaza, and it's like, what are you? Are you kidding me right now? Are you serious? Are you serious with what you're saying? Like they're I don't know. They've screwed themselves completely, and then the world has no sympathy. I don't have any sympathy for them after what we've seen. And I think there's a real risk, though, for Israel at some point, as they continue to get battered, and then they will get overrun. I mean, we're talking about, we got these maybe 1 million plus people that are still trapped in Gaza. At some point, maybe they'll be able to finally break out. You got around 2 million Palestinian people living in with the state of Israel proper. You got the people in the West Bank. At some point, once Israel's getting hit hard enough and they are starting to really lose this war, and you got what's happening with Hezbollah and Lebanon as well, that they will be overrun. I think that is what will happen. I mean, what do you expect from these people, from the people of Gaza, where you've just been bombing them nonstop, untold suffering forever, and they have the chance to get out? Are they going to seek revenge? I think I would if I was in Gaza at that point. If I saw my little kids blown apart, like what? This is you made your bed, Israel. I don't know. It's just I'm afraid that. Yeah, I mean, I don't want people to get slaughtered. No, I don't want even the Israelis. Like as horrible as they've been and how as much they deserve. I don't want to see just a mass slaughter there either. So I just but it might. I don't know. It might be coming. I don't know.
Again, we don't know the extent of the damage that is being done to Israel. We know that actually Hezbollah this time has done some serious damage, not just, random drone attacks that are scaring away the residents of northern Israel. But they hit a very important radar station, is my understanding. It's serious damage to it. It's something that was a very important part of the, the Israeli defense system. And so they are doing their work, as just as the Israelis are not the Israelis, but the Iranians are attacking from the east. And then I've heard these rumors about Ben-Gvir and Netanyahu's brother. I don't know. I have no idea, whether that's true or not. I just haven't seen any confirmation of that. But we have to wonder, because they do impose very severe military censorship. There are many fewer videos that are getting out. But I noticed last night there, even in spite of the censorship, there were enough videos that you could see that, okay, this isn't slowing down. They were saying like, oh, basically we've taken out all their launchers, it's just a trickle now. It was a lot more than a trickle. There were a lot of missiles coming in. Again, you didn't get the close-ups that you had before. I think it's because of the military censorship. But there is clearly damage being done, and we probably don't even know how much damage is being done. Yeah, and the Israelis, as we said, they are just the citizens. They haven't suffered many casualties because they do have this good civilian defense, system. But that may change over time. They just are not getting the warnings that they used to get because they used to have those radars in places like Qatar. They would get, let's say, a good 10 minutes warning, and that gives you time to walk to the nearest air raid shelter. You get up, put your clothes on, and walk to the nearest air raid shelter. You could do it. But now it's a minute because they're gone, and they're just like, they just pick it up at the end of the trajectory of the ballistic missile, and so you got to just jump up in your pajamas or whatever and just race to the air raid shelter. That is going to have a wearing effect on the populace. Now, I think it's wrong, no matter what, to ever glory in the killing of any people, especially civilians. I don't want it. I hope there's a minimum bloodshed. But I am happy to see, I think a lot of us must be, just to see that the sense of invincibility, invulnerability is being punctured. And I think that is necessary because that was part of the problem. They could just, wreak death and devastation on their neighbors, and it never bothered them because it should have bothered them, but it didn't, and part of the reason is they never had to pay the consequences of it. And now they are, and maybe that will lead eventually somewhere, we hope, down the line to them waking up and actually, understanding that, okay, we need to actually live peacefully with our neighbors. We have to learn to coexist with them. We have to make treaties with them. We can't just keep on raining, death and destruction down on them. The other possibility, of course, is though that, oh my God, we can't deal. This is just terribly unfair. We got to go nuclear. Let's hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah. How much longer do you think Israel can last before they throw in the towel or go nuclear?
Well, it's interesting. This is day 12. Remember that we had the 12-day war, and a lot of reports suggested that, they were running out, and that's the reason why they asked for a ceasefire. I think, again, it was the Wall Street Journal that said this, because they knew that their air defense, for whatever it was worth, was just completely was just about to run out. So I imagine it's the same thing, and they got to be close, but we're seeing no signs. And the Iranians, even if there were some efforts to reach a ceasefire, the Iranians are not playing ball this time. They're not, they said, no, we're not doing this. We've been through this before again.
I think, like I said in the beginning, I think that was the thing. The U.S. just thought that we can just call time out when we want, so we'll just give it a try. If it doesn't work, we just say, we can spin it. And
I think it's, in a way, you can say it's a consequence of the reasonableness, the constraint or the restraint that the Iranians showed in the past. You hope that gets through, and the other side say, oh, these are reasonable people, we can work with them. But unfortunately, in the minds of people like Pete Hegseth and Netanyahu, they say, weaklings, obviously they're just scared. We can just destroy them, That's
dominate, right?
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, this will go down in history as probably one of the most dishonorable, foolish wars in history.
I think so. I mean, really.
Like, just being able to live through this stage. This is just it's so crazy. So, well, I remember just even as a little kid, we were talking about just like that the U.S. will not be number one forever, and what will happen, will it go out gracefully? And so I always knew ever since a little kid that this day would come, that the U.S. would no longer be number one. I just couldn't imagine it falling apart in such a just embarrassing, dishonorable, disgusting manner. It's just incredible. Yeah. It's like, man, I can't, these people that are in charge and just the layers, but then when you just add the Epstein and the Israel factor into it as well, Charlie Kirk, it's been a crazy couple of years. So just sometimes we need to take a step back and just look at like, this has been wild, really. Ever since COVID, everything has just been getting crazier and crazier and crazier. When will we get back to sanity? That's what I'm afraid of. Just we're devolving into this craziness. Is it just, can we put ourselves back together again? Can we recover? I mean,
I would like to hope so, but I'm afraid that maybe in the end, it's just like we have to fall apart and the pieces have to arise separately on the other side. And we just hope that, again, that process doesn't involve, well, too much destruction, that the world survives all this. I think that it will, but there is, there are going to be scary moments, and there probably are going to be the use. I don't know that we're going to have a nuclear Armageddon, but I think that at some point we will see the use of nuclear weapons before it's all over. I'm not.
Oh
yeah,
my goodness.
I'm.
Right.
Maybe in this conflict, maybe in a future conflict. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think that we probably will. It's just like the only thing that I can see, over the course of these last several years that has been that was predictable. I mean, that you can make the prediction from year to year, and you would always be right. Is that it's going to get crazier, and it just keeps on getting crazier.
Yeah, that's for sure. Okay, Dad. Well, I think we can end it there.
Sure.
Okay. Have a good rest of your day, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.